And we are live. Hey everyone, nice to see you all joining. Today it's me, Alex, and Rouven will be hosting a webinar. Let's give a couple of minutes for the folks to join in. And in the meantime, if you can post in the chat where you're joining from to make sure that we can hear you well, that you can hear us well, and that you can see us well, that would be awesome. So let's see that there's some people actually from Germany, Rouven, from your country joining in.
I think some of them are going to be from Contentful.
Yeah. London, Portugal, France, Russia, UK, Canada.
Lithuania, Zurich, Canada, Sweden.
Yep.
Cairo.
So,
very nice.
All over the world. Yeah, before we start, I just wanted to make sure that everyone is sort of familiar with the platform and also know what to expect. So I guess most of you already figured out that at the right-hand side, you see the chat. We also, as you can see, there are tabs at the top. So there is a dedicated tab for the questions. I'm pretty sure that you guys will have some questions along the way while we'll be talking with Rouven. So make sure you post the questions inside the dedicated questions tab, because it will be way easier for us to monitor and way easier for us to answer those questions. We also have Emils from Lokalise, who will be moderating the chat and helping you navigate through and help you direct the questions to the right type if needed. Yeah, I guess that's it in terms of the instructions. So once again, very happy to see you all joining, and I guess we can slowly start. Let me pull our nice slide deck here that we've prepared. And again, just quick questions. Quick question: do you guys see the slide deck well as well? Yep, I can see.
It's really working.
Awesome, awesome. So that's a good start. That's a good start that everything is working so far. So yeah, enough me talking. We have a very interesting guest today, Rouven from Contentful. Maybe Rouven, you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everybody, nice to meet you. My name is Rouven. I lead technology partnerships for EMEA at Contentful, and I get to work with amazing partners such as Lokalise across a variety of different industries that have products that help our customers achieve more, faster, better, and a higher quality of life. My own background is I come from an engineering and marketing background. I'm relatively new to the partnerships world, but I really enjoy it, mostly because I get to learn about so many different industries, like, for example, translations, not something I had been exposed to before I started this role.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks, Rouven. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Alex. I'm a product lead here at Lokalise. Initially was working here as a customer success manager. Since then, moved to the product team. And taking care of everything product here in Lokalise. So we've been on a very exciting journey in the past couple of years, growing pretty fast and helping people solve the uncertainties around the localization and making sure that they can grow, utilizing the expansion into other markets. So I think, Rouven, let's maybe start talking a little bit about Contentful and Lokalise for those folks who are maybe not as familiar with this platforms. So if you can, do a quick intro of Contentful, what you guys do, that would be awesome start.
Yeah, Contentful, we're a startup that was originally founded in Berlin, but we nowadays have a global footprint and a global scale with over 2,000 customers. And what we do is we provide a next generation content platform with an API first approach. And yes, I just read that off the slides, but it's really in one sentence what encompasses. I'm going to talk a little bit more later what a content platform is. But the short version is what we do is we help our customers achieve more with their content, bringing into new platforms, new audiences, or new regions, which is kind of where Lokalise comes in.
Awesome, awesome. And yeah, speaking about Lokalise, so Lokalise is a continuous localization and translation management platform. We are mainly used by agile teams who wanna move fast, who wanna localize fast, and who really embrace the continuous flow. As I said, we've been on a pretty exciting journey in the past couple of years, growing very rapidly. You probably can read some stats from the slide. I won't go into that too deep. And also one thing that happened to Lokalise this year is we turned in, not this year, actually, last year, we turned to become a fully remote company, and now we are enjoying people joining from all over the world. And it's nice to see different people with different experience coming to this industry and helping us revolutionize that. But enough talking about Lokalise. I think what we want to start with Rouven today is kind of bringing a bit more certainty into what is the headless CMS, or as Rouven actually told me in our private conversation, that Contentful doesn't refer to doesn't refer to being the headless CMS system, but you refer to being a content platform in general. Is that correct?
That's
Rouven?
right. And we used to call ourselves a headless CMS. We are probably one of the first ones to do so. But over time, as our product has evolved and as also our understanding of what customers actually achieve with Contentful has evolved, we realized we're doing much more than just a CMS without its head. And for those who haven't heard the word before, a headless CMS generally refers to a CMS that doesn't have the front-end rendering part. So a CMS that still manages your content, but that does not control the rendering to a website or to a mobile app that is presented to the end user. Now, before I dive into what we consider a content platform, now I already mess it up. I almost call it a headless platform. Just really quickly, one slide, just our worldview, how we think. What we see is this trend over the past several years emerging that more brands need to do more digital. And if you want to do this well and you want to do it fast, you want to be reactive to new trends, there's three key components you need to get right. And we call this the 3 Ps: people, process, platform. And I always go to this in this order because this is actually the order of importance. People, for us, the best thing we've seen, the most well-working things we've seen with our customers, the best pattern is to have cross-functional teams with strong skills in the team that have a builder ethos. And the builder ethos, I don't mean developers as builders. I mean, in general, builders in the sense of creators. People who create campaigns, people who create sites, people who create content, they can all have the builder ethos. It's just about creating something from the perspective of the customer, building something for customers. And we often recommend to at least have some steering inside the company, but we also work with a lot of great solution partners and agencies that can augment companies that don't have the in-house teams that come with the skill set.
Right.
So now when you have the right people, the next thing is you need the right process. There's decoupled agile teams. So teams that have a strong foundation that is shared, because you want to be able to leverage your investment across different platforms, business units, regions, and so on, that can react quickly to their market, but that have still the means of sharing things. And that is where we see structured content already come into this, because this is what enables reusing not just software in the sense of like libraries or platforms, but also content itself being reused. And then lastly, and this is of course the part where we come in, is the platforms. And by that, I very much don't just mean Contentful, but platforms in general. And we see API-first, cloud-native digital experience stacks. So platforms that allow you to compose them through APIs that are hosted in the cloud, where you don't get bogged down by the maintenance burden of an on-prem solution, that allow you to quickly iterate and deliver new solutions. And now for I guess for both of us, it's very easy to say, like, just buy the right platform and all your problems will be solved. And that would be a terrible lie. So if you ignore the people and the processes and you just go out and buy the right software, you're going to probably do better, but you're not going to unleash the full potential. And I think this is very critical to understand. It's not a one-stop shop. You buy the right software. Here's my suite of tools that does everything for you, and you're going to be good. This is very important.
Absolutely agree with you. Yeah, it's a similar story with the localization platform. I will dive into that a bit later. But yeah, I can absolutely relate to what you're saying.
Yeah. What I always say is Contentful is not an island. Contentful by itself, you're never going to use just Contentful. You're always going to have other software involved in creating something. What we do is we're very focused on one thing. We do one thing really well, and then you choose the best solutions for the other problems. And we have a lot of integrations. We have partners that we work with to bring these solutions to market. Localization being a good example. We don't do localization. We don't have a translation management system. Instead, we have partners that provide this little Lego bricks to enable this. Before we go more into this, you already put up the slide, the builder ethos. I already mentioned this, like, working like a builder is not about coding. We don't think like everybody needs to code. If you can, that's amazing. But for us, the builder is the mindset, the drive to create compelling customer experiences and to think holistically about them. It's not just like, oh, I need to create a copy for a landing page, but to think holistically, what do I need to create a compelling landing page for my audience? And what's involved in that, not just in terms of content. If you have this mindset in your team, this is how you can achieve amazing experiences.
Right, and I would, actually I have one question here. So I can completely understand where you're coming from in terms of the builder ethos. And the people who build stuff are not only the developers, are not only the coders. But I have a question about the environment itself. So I would assume that content management is a team sport, and there are quite a few people involved into that. So would you say that another important aspect of building the content is also being able to work cohesively and effectively with other stakeholders who are involved in that process?
Definitely. And this is part of what we say like cross-functional teams. Like ideally a team has an end-to-end responsibility for delivering something. So you need to have this diverse skill set in the team, but you never have a team that's an island. You're always gonna have external stakeholders that drive the direction of your team, or at least on a high level. And if you can't operate with that, you're not gonna actually achieve things that are successful for the business.
Right, makes sense. And I'm gonna pull up another slide that you had. So if we kind of quickly touched into that Contentful is not a CMS. Contentful is an API-first content platform. When we spoke with you, I found this to be very, very fascinating, how you think about it, how you explain that. So I think our audience would benefit from you explaining it in a bit more details.
And this is probably the most important slide to understand what Contentful is and what it does. So Contentful is infinitely flexible. That means you can build any kind of solutions with it that is driven by content. And yes, for most people, probably the first project they build with Contentful is a website, but you're not limited to a website. You can build things for mobile, for tablets, for augmented reality. We power digital signage on cruise ships. We powered a billboard on Times Square. We have audio guides in museums. We have apps on Apple Watch. It really doesn't matter. Anything that is driven by content or content is presented to a user, you can power it with Contentful. And this is really important about how we think about content. First of all, we don't think content should be limited to a specific presentation layer, to a specific platform. Content should always be, in the ideal case, reusable as much as possible. And then even in the scope of thinking about a specific platform, let's say about mobile, you want to evolve how the content is presented over time. You don't have a static understanding of like, this is my content, and this is how it's going to look like. The content might stay the same, but the presentation might evolve. Or the content evolves and the presentation stays the same. And by doing this based on metadata, instead of doing a strict mapping, you can evolve things more independently. This also plays into topics like experimentation and personalization, because the more you assemble things driven by metadata, the more you can inject other business logic into the process to deliver custom personalized experiences for the specific visitor and based on their journey with your company.
Makes sense. Makes perfect sense. And I have one question here. So I think you kind of explained it a little bit already, but I'm pretty sure that our audience is those who are first hearing about the headless CMS concept or a content platform. They're curious to know about how are you better than some of the competition like Sitecore, like Adobe Experience Manager, and if yes, then what are your competitive advantages in this space?
So if I look at a Sitecore or an AEM, they are stuck in a different mindset. First of all, they're not cloud native. They're generally mostly still deployed as an on-prem solution you have to manage yourself. And when you have to do a big migration to a new product, it takes up an incredible amount of time. Like every few years, you have to go to a new version. But the main difference is that they still very much think about the web and in pages, while we have this more evolved structured content understanding, where we say like content by itself does not imply it's hosted on the web. You have a different layer in between that maps the content back to the web. And this can be very bare bone, and you can have content that is still mostly structured for the web, but reusable. Or, excuse me, you can have a very advanced one where the content is very far apart from the presentation and just assembled throughout the system. And this really depends on the sophistication and the maturity of the customer over time. Nobody starts with this heavily metadata automated system. But that is the power of Contentful, because we give you the flexibility to build your own content model. It can evolve with your business and with your maturity and how you want to drive things. Most customers don't start with like a massively personalized system. You start with something that is more direct, and then you evolve it over time. Now, if you talk to one of those competitors you mentioned, they will tell you, like, just buy the suite of tools that we have here that will do everything from you, and everything is integrated, and everything can get going. And you're stuck with a lot of decisions already made for you that are, to some extent, opinionated and not necessarily the opinions that are helpful for your business.
Right.
And if then something new comes out, and you want to power this with your existing content, you're going to be stuck.
Got it. It's almost like, yeah, as you said, so since you're flexible, your customers can start early, and then as they scale, there won't be any limitations that would kind of hinder their growth opportunities.
Yeah.
And I want
one of my favorite examples there is, so I have an engineering background myself, and if you want to set up a local copy of one of the legacy CMSs to try something out, to try out a different way of presenting content or a different way of structuring content, and you really just prototyping something. Creating a complete copy of the entire CMS is usually a big task. You often have to clone a database and so on. In Contentful, it's about 6 clicks, and you can have a complete sandbox environment with all your existing content in there, so just to try something out. And if the experiment didn't work, you just discard the sandbox, and you can start again. And so every developer can actually very cheaply and very easily just experiment and evolve things over time, because we make it cheap to try things.
Right. And I'm actually want to touch on one thing, and it's about reusing the content, reusing the content on different channels. So as you said, Contentful is kind of a central repository where the content sits, and then it's up to the customer to decide what are the channels that they are utilizing to send this content to. And I think that in taking the localization in mind, this is a very interesting topic, because when it comes to the localization, context is king. So it's very important for the translators and localization managers to know the context. We have customers who are localizing their web apps, their mobile apps, and obviously they have to provide the context to the linguist, like screenshots of the app and so on, for the linguist to understand where this content actually appears on the app. But with utilizing the platform like Contentful, it's becoming even a more complex challenge. You have to not only account for one channel, but you have to account for the different channels and understand how this content can be displayed there, and what are perhaps the nuances that you have to think about. Maybe there are any other interesting insights that you have on the topic of reusable content.
Reusable content at scale is definitely the ultimate achievement. Like, this is what you want. You want to have like a content creator create content once and play it out over all different kinds of media. You might have a TV app hosted on, in like an LG or Samsung TV. You might have it on a mobile app and so on. And creating content that scales both up and down to different devices on different screen sizes is definitely difficult. And also, just to throw in another wrinkle, it's obviously not visible in this picture, because the picture content doesn't have to be visual. We also have customers integrate with Amazon Alexa, for example, to power voice skills. And this is, for example, is one very good example where you want to reuse content. Let's say you have a support knowledge base where customers can get help about whatever problems they might have with your online shop, or with, if you think about like a telco with the customer service portal. And you have it both for the web and a mobile app, and you have it in an Alexa scale. But the interactions are going to be very different to some extent. A lot of the content itself stays true. But if you have, for example, a link, you can't have links easily in an Alexa scale. It doesn't work that way. You're not on a device. You can't click a link and get to something. So you really have to think through of like, what is content that is reusable, that I can take as is? What is content that I need to augment with different information? And what is content I actually need to make a decision like, okay, in this case, this piece of content, if it's presented on a non-visual device, like a voice skill, I need to actually have distinct content. And you need to give the editors the flexibility to override things. So knowledge base is one of my favorite examples because in general, you can have the same text for every platform because the information is going to be very similar. But then when you have key things like, for example, a link to an account page, that needs to change.
Right.
Because on a visual device, you would have a link there that just directly deep links there, while in the voice skill, you need to have instructions how to get there. Or maybe in the voice skill, you even say like, please call us, and you just tell the phone number. But these decisions, you need to open up, and you need to allow for the overrides. And this is then also, when it comes to translations, is the really interesting part, because you need to make sure that this context exists. And like, hey, in this context, by the way, this is reused content, and like, oh, and this is now the voice-specific content.
Exactly.
If you lose that context, you're going to make bad decisions as a translator.
Exactly. No, I can completely relate to that. And speaking about the user personas, so who actually, we kind of talked a little bit about the content creators, who actually uses the platform like Contentful.
Yeah, and we discussed this beforehand when we created this presentation. We compared our like internal user persona structure, and it's actually surprisingly similar. We obviously are in different parts of the content lifecycle, but ultimately both of our products deal with content. And so a lot of the stakeholders or users of our systems are very similar. So the way we think about it is we have 4 different personas. And some of them are exactly overlap. So first of all, we have the developers. As I mentioned before, coming from the heritage of a headless CMS, there is no presentation built into Contentful. So you always need a development team to create a presentation that actually does something useful with the content, presented to a user on the web, in a mobile app, in a voice skill, on a digital signage platform. So you always have, either in-house or through an agency, have developers involved. And they obviously have a big stake in how the platform functions because they need to take this content from Contentful and use it. But even though I'm an engineer, I very strongly believe if you let developers make all the decisions about how to structure how you work with Contentful, you're going to end up with a terrible content model. Right. Our next big stakeholder, and that's the designers. The designers ultimately decide on the UX of how the content is presented. And if they're not involved in the creation of the structure of the content, it's going to lead to some awkward decisions.
Right.
And then the third person that is obviously, first of all, involved in the creation of the content model, but also the day-to-day user of Contentful is then the content creators. And by that, I don't just mean a copywriter, also a marketing manager who creates landing pages and so on. They are content creators. They create something in Contentful.
Right, right.
So those are the big 3 personas. And then as a 4th persona, we have what we call the orchestrator. And we actually recently launched a product specifically targeted at orchestrator, which we call Launch. And this is somebody, for example, a campaign manager, somebody who has the bigger picture around a campaign where there's multiple pieces of content, landing pages, blog posts, product updates, and so on, that need to be coordinated to drive an impact at a specific time. That would be a classical orchestrator for us. Or, and this is then where Lokalise comes in, a translation manager is also an orchestrator in our understanding.
Interesting. That's interesting. So when it comes to, yeah, as you correctly pointed out, the overlap is huge in terms of the user personas when we compare Contentful to Lokalise. And not only the overlap is there, but also the evolution is very similar as well. Because if we speak about a platform like Lokalise, we have also 4 main user personas. One is the managers, and we don't specify what kind of manager it is because it really depends on the maturity of the company. It depends on the size of the company. It could be a product manager, it could be a localization manager, it could be also a project manager who is working for the LSP, who is managing the whole process. So it really depends, but that's a person who orchestrates the whole process and oversees the whole process. Then we have obviously the translators, and I would say that we also do have a chunk of the copywriters using Lokalise as well, who are editing the source copy when needed. But obviously the translators is a big part. So this is the people who make the actual translations happen. Then we have the developers, and here I want to touch on this point that I mentioned about evolution. So at the very beginning, Lokalise was, we had even a slogan, made by developers for developers. So it was a very developer-centric platform that provided all the necessary tools needed for developers to integrate it into their ecosystem and benefit from it without too much hassle. When you're a small company, you need to go into other markets. You are very developer-driven, very technically driven. You want to have the platform that works, that removes the hassle from you, and at that point, you don't care that much about other stuff, which is very important further down the line. And then the fourth user persona that we have, and that was kind of recently emerged, is a designer as well. So I find it fascinating how you refer to the designers being the one who are designing the content model, and we will talk about that a bit later on when we will actually go into the best practices. But for us, we after uncovering the market of design-led localization, what we understood is that designers are integral part of the mix. So localization historically was an afterthought in the whole process. It was done after your product is launched, and it was painful, it was costly, it was labor-intensive. But the earlier you start, the less money you have spent, the less effort you have spent, and the more flexibility you have. And that's where the designers come into mix, because they are the ones who are actually designing the products. And sometimes they're also involved in designing the content model as well. And basically, they're making these decisions, but they have to be in the mix. They have to be aware of what are the language nuances that they might deal with when they are designing this model or the app. So yeah, speaking about that, I think that it's very, very fascinating how this user personas overlap. But also, Rowan, what I understood from our private conversation is that this evolution from being a very developer-centric, but then moving more towards the content creators, the orchestrators, and so on, it's kind of, you had a very similar path. Am I correct?
Yeah, it's definitely true. So Contentful was born out of this idea of the omnichannel content and this frustration from having to use different platforms to, back then, mostly have mobile devices and the web. And the claim to fame, how Contentful got to a significant position, was really by being the most developer-friendly product out there. We still are that, but over time, we realized there's many more people who have not just a significant stake, but who are primary users of Contentful than just developers. And so we've gone through a similar evolution.
Right. Interesting. And coming back to the topic of localization, I just wanted, to pull this slide to emphasize on the importance of the localization in the global landscape in general. And I won't be reading the stats from the slide, but actually they're a couple of years old already. But when you have that much content, and the content is pretty much the king, you have to, if you want to grow, you have to think of the other markets. You have to think of how you will localize your content further down the line to make sure that you get the most out of it. And as one of our customers said, and I really like this quote, I keep repeating that, I think, in all the webinars, so in case everyone already heard that quote, apologies, is that localization is the shortcut to growth. So that's one of the ways how you can easily achieve, not easily, but how you can achieve the growth. And it's a pretty, so it's not something, uncertain. There are several steps that you have to take in order to implement the proper localization process. And the interesting fact is that some might argue that localization might be more relevant, like for the B2C product in comparison to the B2B product, because you're like in the B2B space, you're working with the with people who know the English language. But we also tend to believe here in Lokalise that it's all comes down to the friction. So if you remove the unnecessary friction that was previously there, when it comes to implementing the localization processes, tools, and so on, then that's a no-brainer. At some point, you will localize, and you will have to go into the other markets, because that would be a natural way for you to grow. And I'm actually curious, Rouven. So you said that you work with the translation managers, with the localization managers. Like, as a person who works in Contentful and who mostly cares about the content management, what are the main questions that you yourself or like your customer have around the localization?
Yeah. So localization is something that we have capabilities for, but it's definitely not something we have to the level of a translation management system, because we're not one. And this goes back to this idea of like, we're just one Lego brick, and then we have many other Lego bricks that are part of a stack a customer needs to build until they have a full house that is the actual customer experience. And so we are very forward that like, when you want to do localization at scale, you should work with a partner of ours that provides you a translation management system and an integration for that. So that's already then turns most of the question into a question of like, okay, how do you integrate with it? What does the actual user flow like? There's a lot of process questions around this that also the customer has to make decisions about. Like, is there a review stage within Contentful, or should content be automatically published after it's completed its translation? Similar things that are very specific to the user, and that needs to be decided between a localization manager and somebody who has overall ownership for the content that is being produced, what the flow should look like. The other part that is then for localization manager and for the designers, again, very relevant, is you need to make sure the content model is adapted to the localization. So if you think about being a German speaker, but working in a primarily English-speaking company, the most common example is you need to make sure that the length restrictions which you can set in your content model actually accommodate also other languages. Some languages are incredibly short and succinct, and other languages just need a couple more characters. I forgot what it is, but I think like German is like 20-25% longer on average than English. So if you don't allow for this in your content model, and also in how you tell content creators to work with Contentful, to, hey, okay, this field lets you store 200 characters because this is what we allocated in space in what we want to work with, how much space we want to allocate in our front ends. You need to actually make sure to leave enough room in your English text when you translate them to German or French or Spanish and so on. So these questions, like really the interaction between the front end and the design, the content model and the content creation workflow, and then the translation workflow. This is the piece where, for us, a localization manager plays a role. Then the actual translation effort, the ongoing translation work, that doesn't happen in Contentful. That happens in, for example, Lokalise. And so this is not really, the whole workflow part of the translations is not really something we're concerned with.
Right. Makes sense. And yeah, I just wanted also briefly to touch on the, for those who are involved in the content management, but those who are not yet maybe localizing, to kind of talk through some of the fundamentals of how you can, what are the best practices for having an effective localization strategy, because we see, and again, it all comes down to the needs, but we see customers who kind of dive in straight and start localizing, but there are actually some steps that you really want to take care of in order to make sure that you can extract the most value and you can have a really cohesive and effective localization strategy in place. And again, if we break it down into three main sections, three main topics. One is actually understanding like what you need. And again, we have several examples. For example, there is one company that I know who've been they were in a market where they could afford to not have the best possible translation quality, and they had traffic going from various regions to their app, And so they had to test out, like they had to test out which of them performs better, and their need was to do it quick, easy, hassle-free, pay as little money as possible, and validate the need coming from the different markets so that they can then focus on specific markets. And so they basically used the machine translation, and they hired some cheap freelance translators to do some post-editing afterwards, and it worked perfectly for them. It achieved their goals. But there are also some other companies, like, for example, some companies working in the medical technology space, right? So they cannot afford to have low quality translations, because that could actually backlash quite a lot. There could be some legal consequences because of that. And so they really have to think strategically about what markets that they go after, what languages they need to add, and invest heavily into the process and the high quality translation. So just kind of to sum up, first you need to identify your needs, and it's, again, prioritizing the markets, assessing your content, allocating the budget, and also defining the goals and KPIs, what you want to achieve from the localization, what you want to achieve from rolling out a new language, because otherwise you won't really know what worked and what didn't. Second one, and again, I cannot stress it, the importance of it enough, especially in the context of the working with the content platforms like Contentful, where you have where your content can be pulled into multiple channels, is documenting your brand properly and providing as much guidance as possible to the linguists so that they can actually do their job well. And again, it comes down to defining the glossary before you actually start localizing, providing the style guide, specific conventions, and grammars to avoid, for example, or even looking at the competition and letting your linguists know what you like, what you don't like, and how you want to be perceived by your audience. Because if you don't do that, then there is a pretty high chance that you will end up in the situation when you will be frustrated, your linguists will be frustrated, and nobody will be happy.
And all of this is also things that help your editorial team. Like if you onboard new editors, if you have all these resources at the ready, they're going to have a much smoother transition into your organization and into your workflow to create content that fits your brand, your tone of voice, etc. So this is not just a localization exercise. It's a good start also to just create consistency and quality in your content.
Absolutely, absolutely. I can double down on that. And last but not least is also setting the localization process right. And you kind of touched upon that briefly. So you said that, again, like customers who use Contentful and who use other TMS systems, for example, Lokalise or others, the process can be different. So in terms of publishing, reviewing, where does it happen? Does it happen in the TMS? Does it happen in the content platform? And so I would say that there is no, kind of golden rule that fits everyone. Everyone has different processes. But it's very important to do a couple of things. First, to pick the tool that actually satisfies your needs now, but also will support you at scale. And that's kind of, if we go back to what you mentioned about Contentful, that you can kind of start easy, but then you need to make sure that once you scale and you have more content to manage, you have more channels, that the platform supports that. And the same comes to the TMS system. Again, once you scale the number of languages that you have, you should make sure that this platform would support that. And again, your needs will evolve as well. Choosing the vendor that has the language expertise, the budget, or maybe freelance translators. So maybe it's a handpicked team of the freelance translators that works well. But then you have to have a person who manages this team so that the work can be controlled and you can keep a track of what's happening. And last but not least is when you set this process of what are the revision steps, publishing steps, and so on and so forth, quality control steps. As I mentioned previously, there is no golden rule, but you need to communicate that clearly to all the stakeholders and make sure that you you document this process as well, so that everybody is on the same page, everybody knows what to expect, because otherwise it can quickly become a burden and it can quickly go out of hand when you scale. And so we have a couple of we already touched on some of these points previously, but we wanted to have this kind of a summary slide with some best practices and some talking points that we wanted to discuss with Rouven. I actually had a question for you, Rouven. So speaking about, you mentioned some nuances already, and knowing that you have a content in multiple channels, I remember we talked about the different formatting nuances that should the content managers and the team of translators should account for. Maybe you can, you can shed a bit more light to the audience as well. Oh, Rouven, you're on mute.
That always happens. There's also a great question from Anouk that I already saw that asked, like, how do we store multiple languages in Contentful? That segues nicely into this. So as you create the content model, as you set it up in Contentful, you structure your content. So you divide your content into content types and fields in those content types. Now, for every single field, and the field can be something as big as the main body of a blog post, or they can be as small as a specific information, like, for example, if you have an author, their Facebook handle. And then also you use fields to assemble content into larger structures. It all sounds a little bit daunting if you don't see it. We don't have a visualization of that here in this context. For that, please check on our website. But the key thing is, for every field, we store multiple languages. And as you create the content model, you decide which fields are actually localized and which fields aren't localized. So, for example, an author's Facebook handle is definitely not going to change as you translate the content into different languages. That would be a classic field to not localize, so that a tool like Lokalise doesn't even pull it out of Contentful and gives it to a translator, because you don't want to pay for somebody to check, like, yes, it's the same Facebook handle. That's not worth it. And so this is one consideration, that as you go through this, you need to make sure that you have an understanding which things actually need to be translated. And also which things might not seem like things that need to be translated, but they need to be localized because there might be regional differences, say currencies. So these things is an exercise you need to go through. The other part you need to do, and this is then also where designer definitely comes in, is we encourage our customers to set a lot of validations on the content to make sure it has the shape that it expected, to make sure as you scale across different platforms, or even just as you revamp the layout, you don't hit constraints in your layout, because then you have content that is twice as long as you allocated for in your design. But if you have these constraints, you need to make sure that they actually will still stay true as you add more languages that have different properties. So this is usually mostly about length. And so going through this, it can also be if you have regular expression validations. We have some customers, for example, who validate that you don't use any swear words in their content. These things you need to make sure that they are localized in your setup.
Right. Makes sense. And another point that I think kind of we briefly touched upon previously, but is a very important one, is in general I would say that the audience is not the audience, but the localization and content management space itself is shifting, as we've discovered also today, and embracing the API first approach is a must do in order to connect these building blocks, as Rouven mentioned, because there are different platforms who are doing their thing the best. Either that's a content management, either that's a translation management, or something else. And we do have, so our products actually, Contentful and Lokalise, we do have the out-of-the-box integration, which works pretty well for and covers most of the needs. You can pull out the content, localize it within the Lokalise platform, push it back, and filter out what you want to export or import, and so on and so forth. But as your needs scale, as we figured out, once you have more content, maybe you have different types of the content, maybe you have different cadences for localizing different languages or the different content types. What you will have is the possibility to build and expand on top of the out-of-the-box integration and build the custom integration for the custom workflows that will do just what you needed to do. And maybe, Rouven, maybe you have any kind of also any advice, any best practices in general in terms of using the API of Contentful and kind of connecting Contentful to other building blocks.
I think it's, I don't have concrete advice, because ultimately it comes down to, like, you need to figure out what are the problems you're trying to solve, what are complementary products you might get off the shelf to solve them. We do have a large integration libraries with partners that offer a variety of solutions, from personalization, experimentation, online shopping, and localization, of course. But then for certain things, they're just specific to your workflow, and you just need to build your own thing and to not be shy about this. It's definitely, by going with this API-first approach and API-first tooling, there's always going to be some assembly required. But this is where the power comes from, because we're not locking you into a predetermined workflow that we thought up because in our infinite wisdom, we decide, like, this is the ultimate content workflow and this is how everybody has to work now. We really give you the building blocks to be the master of your own destiny and to customize the content structure and how you work with that content to your business needs. And this is really the key. This is the part where the true power comes from, because you're not forced into a structure we give you, but you build your own. And this goes back to the builder ethos. It's about building ultimately. And you need to have this mindset. You're building something that's going to unlock the power.
Exactly. And yeah, I think it would sum it up pretty nicely. So builder ethos is definitely what you need to have in order to build your content in multiple languages or one language, whatever. But also another one is that it's a team sport. So the content management is a team sport, localization is a team sport. There are different stakeholders involved into that. And it's very important that they work together to solve the problems that they have. And I think one of the points that we have here on the slide is designing the content model with the channels and localization in mind. So whenever you're planning for it, you should make sure that there is a proper team in place, and that those who are designing the content, or for example, designing the app, they are in pretty close communication with others to make sure that you account for the for different nuances that will come up along the way.
Yeah, I think it's true. And the power comes really also then from automating it. And I think this is where I just want to emphasize again that Lokalise does have this out-of-the-box integration to directly work with Contentful, because this is then power and scale, and also quickly, because you can use an out-of-the-box solution to set all this up. It really helps just to be faster with this. It is a lot of work to set up the content model. It's not something you can get out of by having an off-the-shelf integration, but at least you don't have to think about the connection between the systems anymore to a large extent, because you have it out of the box.
Makes sense, makes sense. And I think, yeah, I'm a bit cautious of the time, so I think we can segue nicely to the questions, because it seems like we have really a lot of them. So I'll
quite a few.
Yeah, I'll start with the most upvoted ones. Let me quickly scroll. So Bartosz is asking, Lokalise has a plugin for Contentful pull model that works, but the UX is not really a great workflow. Do you plan to have a button in Contentful to request localizations like for SmartLink? That's a good question, Bartosz. So we are constantly working on improving our integrations and plugins, because that's one of the main pillars of Lokalise, obviously. So I would say that yes, we are planning. We can definitely discuss. I'm not planning to disclose anything on the public webinar, so that's something that you can reach out to us after the webinar, and we can definitely discuss it.
Awesome. Let's go with the second most upvoted one, because I think this one is directed towards me. Yvonne is asking, how do I find out when there are changes from the content, like new entries in Contentful? It would be great if there would be a notification. This goes to the part about building. So there is no built-in way for you to get an email or Slack notification in Contentful, but we do have a very elaborate webhook system where you can get programmatic notifications about changes. And we do have a number of templates how to directly connect this webhook, for example, to Slack, to get a Slack message about any new entry that is published, for example, or any new entry that is created, because it depends on, do you want to have an update when something is created for the first time but is still an empty shell, or do you want to get an update when it's actually published to your front end? So yes, there is a way to have the notifications. We give the messages out, but you need to do that additional step of configuring when do you want the notification and where do you want the notification, like a Slack channel, an email, or something of the likes. I hope that answers it.
Awesome. Let's take, there is another one. I think that is heavily upvoted, and this one is directed to me. So as a customer success manager for Lokalise, did you happen to work with any customers who successfully integrated Lokalise with Contentful? Could you describe a bit how that was for them, challenges, successes, and any noteworthy learnings? That's a very good question, Tessa. So actually, when I was working as a CSM, I think we just rolled out the Contentful integration, and I didn't work with many customers who set it up out of the box. But what I can tell you is we do have some that use the out of the box integration pretty successfully, and I'm happy to direct you to the customer success team who is working with this account so that they can share the learnings, insights, and so on. We also do have some customers with a more sophisticated needs who build their own integrations with Contentful that satisfy their needs and that satisfy their workflows that they have built. So, and again, we have a team of the customer success managers and a solution architect who could be in a better position to answer some of the more concrete questions that you might have. Probably that's not the most the answer that you were expected to hear, but I'm pretty sure that after the webinar, yeah, we can get in touch and we can ask more specific questions that you might have.
Mm-hmm. I really like how the top upvote questions are very nicely alternating between being directed to you or to me. So JT is asking, Contentful is a CMS, Lokalise is a TMS, it almost rhymes. Both support localized content. If the two are combined, there's a transfer of data between the two, and systems contain the same data. Which system does the user access for completed localized content? And what are the reasons for picking one system over the other? This is a really good question, because I think for a lot of people new to the space, this is very confusing, because you do end up with large parts of your content in both Lokalise and Contentful. The key thing is that not everything actually ends up in Lokalise. So I mentioned earlier, you might have some content that is not actually localized, that is static across languages. So this would stay in Contentful. And you would never actually hit Lokalise because it's not part of what needs to be translated. Also, anything that is about the assembly of content and is not being localized is something that would stay in Contentful. So ultimately, what happens is the content ends up back in Contentful, and you use Contentful's APIs to take the content. That makes it also eliminates that you have to interact with two different tools to get to the source language and to the translated content, because you have a unified API for all the content to get it out, no matter if it's localized or not localized. This is also, we have a feature called fallback locales, so that you can define for different languages, for different markets, what languages should be shown if no translation is yet available. Again, going back to the example of a support knowledge base, you might make the decision that it's more important to have an updated article online immediately. And let's say it's you're operating in Canada, and yes, people in Quebec massively prefer to see French Canadian content. But if you have French content for France, that might be an acceptable fallback. Or maybe English is the acceptable fallback. Those decisions you need to make, but this would allow you then, for example, also to have content available when the translation is still in progress and localized. Anything from you to add, Alexander, to this?
Well, actually, I was already focused. I was reading some questions as they keep coming in.
And I'm just gonna skip this one, so I'm gonna give you room for the next one.
Yeah, and I will pick up the question from Swan, who is asking, what does a typical localization workflow looks like? Contentful supports fields in multiple languages. Where does Lokalise comes into play? And that's a very interesting question. And I think, Swan, where you also are coming from is, and Rouven, please correct me if I'm wrong. When I was exploring Contentful back in a couple of years ago, I think that there are some scenarios and some use cases when the customer would invite the translators to collaborate within the Contentful in general to translate the content. Yeah. And so I think that comes down to the point that Rouven mentioned, that even though some of the system can kind of do everything you want them to do, but the main focus area for Contentful is obviously the content and content management, and the main focus area for Lokalise is the translation management. And so Lokalise has other tools in place that allow it allow translators to perform the better job. And what I mean by these tools are, first of all, providing the context in a visual way, utilizing some of the language resources like glossary, like translation memory, so that you can perform your job more effectively, so that linguists can perform a job more effectively. The possibility to order the translations from the freelance translators or from localized translators is another thing. So if you don't have any translators, then you would need to source these translations from somewhere. And in case you're working with the vendors or with the freelance translators, you would be able to control the progress of your translations within Lokalise platform, as you would be able to monitor the progress by creating the specific tasks and jobs for them. So there are a couple of features and functions inside the Lokalise that make the whole translation management process a bit more efficient and effective than if it was done in the Contentful. And again, it all comes down to what your needs are. There might be situations when you, as a customer, you have let's say country managers who speak the language, and you're fine if they're making the translations themselves, or maybe you have some freelance translators that you work really closely with that operate within the Contentful space and do not need other tools and other context, extra knowledge in order to do the good job. But in other situations, when you work with some external vendors or freelancers, that would be a must-have. And one of the things that I also mentioned is a translation memory. So being able to save on the costs of translating the content, because it might be that you've already translated some strings in the past, and therefore your linguist will charge you way less for those who fall into the high matches in comparison to those that are completely new strings that were never been translated. And probably there is a room for one last question.
Yeah, let's do last question. I think there was one interesting here that I wanted to get back to, which is from Rabab, about if Contentful provides the export-import capabilities for translations. And I think this is a good finishing out, because we don't. So we provide a set of APIs to allow integrations to be built. And one of the most popular categories of integrations is translation management systems. And so Lokalise is actually the one who built the functionality to export content from Contentful and put it into their translation management system. And maybe, Alexander, you can explain a little bit more about how that process works. But for us, the framework in which we work on is we provide the means to do all these things. So we have specific patterns that translation management systems can follow to get to the content, but there's no manual export-import happening. It's all automated in the backend through APIs.
All right. So yeah, maybe to add on that. So kind of there are multiple steps in terms of the integration itself. So the first one is the linking of the content and really fetching the content that you have in your workspace. The second step is allowing the user to filter out through the content, because as Rouven said, there might be some content that you don't need the localization for. There might be some that you need the localization for. So you can filter out what you need and what you don't need. And then the next step would be import that into Lokalise, potentially create other languages that if you're rolling out a new language, or in case you've already set up your locales both on the Contentful side and Lokalise side and just need to have some updates, then this step could be omitted. Then the whole translation lifecycle happens within the Lokalise platform when the translations are done. And after that, the content could be exported, into the Contentful system by a press of the button, or again, if you're utilizing the API, you can also do that automatically.
Awesome. And I think with that, we're hitting time.
Absolutely, yeah. I think this was a very fascinating conversation that we had. I enjoyed talking to you, Rouven. I also like the participation from the audience. I think we had very good questions. And I would like to say thank you for everyone who participated in this webinar. I hope it was useful, and I hope to see you all in the upcoming webinars that we will host.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And yeah, thank you for everybody who tuned in and for a lot of great questions. For those questions directed towards Contentful that we didn't get to, we will follow up in the next few weeks and reach out to you directly with answers.
Awesome. Awesome. See you all and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.